right, so we are continuing with looking at examples of sacred centers and the Axis Mundi throughout the SnyderVerse. So we look back at the concept of the sacred center as a distress beacon or SOS signal, because it's going to relate to something slightly different, but still a similar idea of an emanation from some center, right? So the first type of emanation from a center we really examined was a signal, simply a signal being sent. It can be a distress beacon, as in Man of Steel, where he accessed the ancient scout ship, and that triggered and communicated with the higher realm of outer space where Zod was, across an ocean of stars, right? We have seen how this works with Superman's sacrificial scream, releasing his very life energy out into the various corners of the world. And so, clearly, a sign of distress, given that he is in extreme pain and dies, right? So that looks painful to me. Here we see the result of Doomsday effectively in distress after he gets shot up by the helicopters. When man is confronted with a challenge to his existence, whether physical or spiritual or psychological, he tends to lash out in the over-aggressive manner which at its greatest and most lethal and destructive expression is like an atomic bomb. He has a need to generate his own Axis Mundi, but in the process destroys his environment. We see Lex Luthor's tower as a clear Axis Mundi, and again the motif of circles surrounding the center of energy emanations. So we have the circle motif that we're looking at. We're really focusing on the structure, and we're talking about all these other elements. So there's the circle, the center, the Axis Mundi, the peak. We have this sort of dome-like structure, as well as this line as the Axis Mundi. We have, again, the circle, the emanations from a center, right? So these are emanating outward from some center. And in this case, they are a destructive force. But it's still related to his distress, right? Even Doomsday is in distress. When you see he's taking up all of these shots, he's almost like crouching down like he's in pain, okay? And so he, to accommodate that, he lashes outward, okay? So some internal turmoil or struggle is manifesting outward into the outward world. We see emanating circles surrounding Superman, who dies and is reborn after being hit with a nuclear missile. So again, we see the circles emanate from Superman. He's sort of floating out there in the cosmic planes, right? So he's not on Earth yet. Doomsday has actually fallen. So there's almost a connecting line between these two sacred centers, right? So Doomsday and Superman reflect, in some sense, other sacred centers. We see, again, from a different point of view, the fall of Doomsday, right? The devil's coming from the sky, the devil in this case. And so note, of course, the surrounding circle, as well as his trajectory downward along the Axis Mundi, and then, of course, the emanation aspect. So there's been an emanation from a center. Okay, so we also have Barry toward the end. When he's trying to separate the three mother boxes, we see that it is representative of a sacred center. We see like these meridian lines kind of point toward the center. Again, it's in the center of the tower and all of that. And so it is a sacred center. And notice that he screams, again, much like Superman screams, outward. And so when Superman screams outward, he emanates these circles that get everyone's attention. They all like look at it. It's like, oh wow, there's like something going on, right? Same thing here though. If you actually look at how this scene is structured, after he screams Barry, like really loudly, first we see Superman turn, right? So that's the first kind of interaction. And so Superman first kind of gets that signal. But we see back here, there's Aquaman and Wonder Woman. They haven't gotten the signal yet, right? Or they haven't reacted yet. And then they react. So notice that we're getting progressively outward, And as we get progressively outward, the signal is kind of being transmitted in much the same way as when Superman screams, and then like the movie kind of progressively moves outward to these other areas, corners of the earth. And so finally, so they're all looking at him at the end of the day, but this just emphasizes that there's a progressive nature, and that progressive, the way it's shot and the way it's cut and edited and all of that, shows that kind of emanation, of circle of influence, let's say, of the sacred center, the distress signal that originated from the center. So you can imagine like these sort of circles radiating outward from that center, first runs into Superman and then runs into Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and they get the attention on the sacred center. So cool stuff. Okay, so much like Cyborg screams out Barry, and then we have Superman turn, and then further out we have Aquaman and Wonder Woman turn. We have in the history lesson, we have the leaders of each group. Here we have Hippolyta scream out, yell out, Amazons, and then they all yell out, and then they kind of follow her, right? So there's this idea that there is a center, the leader, the king or queen, whoever it is, that's the initiator, and then there are these outward emanations that, like, okay, they respond. And so that kind of reflects, if you can think about, a center sending signals and kind of affecting those spheres of influence, just like Superman yells out in the beginning, and then it's like everyone like turns, but we're moving progressively outward. So we also have Atlantis, right? The leader there, the king, scream out, and then they scream out and follow. Okay, we have the land of man, the king. He's like, with me, and then they all scream out in response. So it's, again, there's like this central figure, this sacred being that is the sacred center, the sacred leader, king or queen, that initiates the interaction and engagement, and then that emanates outward in concentric circles, you could say, right, into the multitude, right? So the multitude, in response to the singular individual, we have the people around it who respond to those spheres of influence or circles of influence to also follow in kind to do the righteous work of defeating Darkseid. So we also have, then everyone joins in, right? So now the whole world is now fighting against this evil force, right? So this is a general thing. It's like there's a central thing that is the propagator of action and intent and the sort of active behavior to initiate this forceful response, taking a stand, I should say. It's like they're taking a stand against this threat, okay? And so you have that with Superman, just sort of sending circles of influence around in the beginning. You have Cyborg, who says Barry, and then you have Superman turn, and then further away you have, right, Aquaman and Wonder Woman. And also here, so you have the leader of the pack, and then they respond. You have the multitude respond, the singular, and then the multitude, the singular, and then the multitude. In this sense, in this physical sense, the geometric sense of like some signals being slowly propagated outward, right? And we've seen that type of physical sense. I'm not just making this up. We've seen this type of physical sense. The corresponding nature is a destructive thing. So there's the example when Cyborg has that vision, and the entire world is shown to be destroyed because of like the nuclear power at the center. So there's the center which propagates this circle around the world, and that actually is the destroyer of the world. So it's not all, it can be good or bad, but it is a sacred center. It does have those concentric rings, circles of influence, that also send signals or propagate outward from the center. And as we've seen before, Barry Allen, you can reverse time to have that pinch in the center, or when Wonder Woman, which we'll see later, pins the terrorist to the center, and then he ascends. So you can have like this pinning and then ascent, or you can have like this dropping and then like descent, destruction. But there are all these just various different ways of having that geometric signal propagation take place in all these different types of dramas. Okay. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, Superman is revived with the Mother Box. They move him from one sacred center, his place of burial, right, to another sacred center, the scout ship. So all of these wires here, you should really be thinking of them as roots, or I think of them as roots in the earth, right? So a tree has a root system in the earth, and they are the womb of the belly of the whale in this case is also an inner temple, is also something within the earth. And so we note these sort of branching like systems, these branching structures, which again resemble the roots from some central tree system. Okay, so either upward or downward, the tree branches off in this manner. And so this is an example of the world tree motif. So something that has been, right, they even say the future has been rooted in the present. The root, all of these things that descend downward, like these wires and whatnot, are like the roots that allow for, again, here we go, the sacred thing to ascend up top. And in this case, that's Superman, right? So Superman has gone from a state of death to a state of life up here. So life up there, death down here. He has traversed an axis mundi, and we see the motifs of trees, branches, roots, the whale, the temple, all of these things simultaneously. Here we have again another axis mundi where we start with Doomsday at sort of this peak, this little mound peak, which is where Lex Tower was, but it's been since demolished, and he's sort of standing on the rubble. And then Superman comes in and takes him upward, right? And so they ascend to a higher realm. We have this upwards transition from Earth to the heavens. And again, I want to note the idea that it is like a world tree with these trees in the foreground, or there's an illusion or a motif of it being related to a tree. Okay, so the sacred tree, the world tree, the axis mundi, all of these things are very much interlinked and related, and different aspects of the same thing. And so man's but there's a juxtaposition here, the foreground with respect to the background, of course, the darkness of the tree leaves in the foreground juxtaposed to the brightness of the background, man's intellect, the phallus of the intellect, the brightness of that. Man over-relies on the technological aspect and way toward ascent, right? So man uses technology to ascend, but that doesn't end up solving his problem, does it? Because Doomsday comes back down, he falls down, and he's even more powered.
Every time we hit it, we make it more powerful. We can't attack.
What are you saying, Calvin?
I'm saying it's unkillable.
Just trying to use force, trying to use aggression, trying to use the penetrative aspect of the intellect, right? Have we really evolved in any significant way if all we're doing is developing more elaborate ways to destroy things? Okay, so there's the irony there that we can go to the heavens with our intellectual prowess, and that still doesn't solve the problem. Right? It actually worsens the problem.
The Kryptonian archive contains knowledge from 100,000 different worlds.
Good. Teach me.
Steppenwolf uses the Sacred Center as an Axis Mundi to contact the higher realms, speaking with the Sod and Darkseid, right? So the Axis Mundi, again, is a way to communicate with other realms, right? Here he is in the center, in the Sacred Center, where the mother boxes are formed, where the meridian lines converge to this point, right? So everything is like emanating from the center, whether they be straight lines or even circles, right? So here, though, we look at its central structure, its pillar-like structure, and its ability, therefore, to communicate with higher beings in other realms. So it's like a phone. It's a very interesting looking phone, but it is a phone.
Decide, I call to thee.
And so one thing you can also note, I'll probably have a picture of it next to it, is the idea that this little pillar here, like, it has a strange form, doesn't it? It kind of has like this kind of weird form. Well, we've seen something like that before. Here's a picture of the kryptonite shaving, the little piece of kryptonite that Lex Luthor obtained and was sharing with the senators. Similar shape, similar idea. It's also in the center. Interesting. There's definitely plenty to be said about that, but I just leave that as a curiosity for now. Superman ascends mountains in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and so too communicates with the heavenly ghost of his father, right? So again, we're communicating between realms. Here we have the ghosts, right? So a ghost, a spirit, this being that has passed on to another realm, we say they pass on after they've died. His ascent in this mountain, in this Axis Mundi, which is the mountain, is allowing him to communicate with these beings. This guy even says, like, he's come here to die, right? So if you're ascending an Axis Mundi, going to another world, another element of the Axis Mundi is that it's actually related to a death and rebirth. So if you're leaving one world, you're leaving one plane of existence, going to another plane of existence, that means you are dying and being reborn into a new plane, a new mode of being, okay, a new mode of existence. And so when he dies, yeah, that's because he's ascending the Axis Mundi as well here. So Lois kind of captures that as he walks up the mountain to access the scout ship and thus be able to communicate with his father, okay. So here we have an example in BVS where Batman uses the bat signal to communicate, right? So first of all, he communicates with, it's a communication with Superman, right? So Superman said, next time they shine your light in the sky, don't go to it. Well, here's Batman saying, I'm shining my light in the sky, come at me. Right? That's what that is. So he's actually he's using his bat signal, which connects to the sky, connects him to the sky, and thus sends a message, right? So it's a message that's visible in Metropolis. That's why we have Lex, who is able to see the bat signal after he just turned it on here. So by reaching the peak, that makes it visible, and there's an awareness or consciousness that gets emanated outward from that central peak because of the emanations. Okay, so it's at the sacred center. It's in the sky. It's transcended from, like, if you want to look in really closely here, it's like Batman's somewhere there, right, approximately. And it's ascended into the sky like that. And so that means it's ascended the Axis Mundi. It's now there for all to see, and therefore is, the means to communicate. So Lex sees it, Superman sees it, and in general, people, that's how it catches Batman's attention, right? Batman sees it when the bat signal is projected out. So the bat signal is also a kind of Axis Mundi where you have the symbol, the sacred symbol, being projected from one mode of being here, right? There's a mode of being, and then there's a mode of being of the bat signal up here, which is more like ethereal, just kind of like kind of this figure, ghostly thing in the sky. So, right? So this is communication between realms. This is the Axis Mundi. This is sacred centers. Okay, so one of the terrorists in Zack Snyder's Justice League goes from the state of unrestrained to restrained. Pinned in the center, he ascends the Axis Mundi of the lasso of truth, right? So we see she confines him, and after confining him, he gets raised up. She pulls him up, right? First he's down here, right? First he's just like on this plane of reality. He gets pinned, he gets pulled up to another plane of reality, another mode of being, in this case a movement between behavioral states. So he's actually telling the truth. He's speaking, he's not silent. He's speaking freely about what they are doing, right? So that's a change in behavioral state. Usually he wouldn't do that, right? But up here he has ascended this Axis Mundi, which is the lasso of truth, to communicate with a divine being truth to a divine being, a Wonder Woman. Okay, so he's just speaking freely, right? He's just like, all this truth is coming out, and there's one plane to another plane, change in behavioral state as well. So it's a psychological shift, a behavioral shift. It can manifest in many different ways. All right, so here we have Superman ascends the axis of the oil rig, right? So the oil rig is the thing that breaks the homogeneity of this water and sea around it, right? So Martha later comes and says, it's an island, swim towards it, right? So this pillar, this island, this sacred center, they're all related to each other, okay? So this, however, I want to emphasize, is a change in behavioral state. So notice he's very passive here. He just kind of like falls over, just kind of like not really paying attention. He's clothed. He's just like, he's not in it. He's not in the right headspace. However, when he sees this danger, he swims towards it. And so we end up here. He swims towards that center. So he's at that oil rig now here. And he has declothed himself, right? So that's, again, a rebirth right there, right? So when you're ascending and changing planes of one mode of being to another mode of being, you are being reborn in some sense. You're dying from one mode and being reborn into another mode. So remember, after he does this, he can't go back to working as on the boat anymore, because he's exposed himself. So in a practical sense, he moves on to other positions. In the metaphysical sense, he is reborn, and so he no longer exists on that plane. He has ascended an Axis Mundi, and he now has to change his mode and his job, right? His job is changing as well. So he here is shown ascending this axis of the oil rig. They don't actually show him ascend, but he's at the bottom, and then he makes it to the top somehow. So he must have ascended somewhere, right? So here again, notice this idea of kind of shedding his skin like a snake sheds its slough. He's being reborn. He's being exposed. He's being visible to the eyes on the oil rig. And when a baby is born from the womb, they go from a hidden state to an exposed state, right? They're hidden and enclosed to naked and exposed. Yes. And so this is what's happening here. This is a rebirth, right? And then, of course, the idea here, though, I really want to emphasize, is that there is an actual behavioral shift. So when he's here, he's much more assertive. He's much more showing his strength. He's able to show who he is. His true nature comes out. He kind of leads people along the way. He's like, go, go, go. He's very assertive here. And here he's very passive. So we're going from a passive state to an active state. From just kind of, not doing much and just kind of being, I don't know, lethargic in some way, or whatever that headspace is. That's a stark contrast to what we see him. He's leading people out. He's saying, go, go, go. He's saying, get up there. He's like, I'm going to take care of this. It's a profoundly different headspace to be in. And the point is, the ascent of the Axis Mundi is therefore another way to kind of emphasize that fact that he has transitioned. Not only his physical state has changed, but his mental and behavioral state have changed. And so he's like a completely different person. He's revealing his true inner nature. So he's shedding this protective layer to reveal his truth that is like a rebirth. That is an ascent of the Axis Mundi here. Okay. And I want to emphasize that the fire, the hot energy we've talked about before, that the hot, dense energy at the sacred center is where this occurs. Okay, this is an important element. It's lots of cool water, cool blue water on the outskirts, and there is a lot of dense energy in the sacred center here, actually. Falling, and so there's I also want to say that there's a duality here in what the fire represents, right? Fire here initially is like a bad thing, right? So it's like the oil rigs being destroyed, like it's confining people and potentially killing them because it's taking away their oxygen and whatnot, and so they're trapped by all this destruction. And so that's the fire in the negative light, but there's also fire in the positive light. So the fire that he is inflamed in represents the fire of the spirit to step out into the world and to act and to be an agent of change, to be an individual agent, to express that inner fire within the spirit of man. So to awaken the fire is like the phoenix, like the flames and everything, just like he is becoming alive here. All right. So that's a very important element as well. And so there's always like kind of this dualistic element that might even occur simultaneously. So simultaneously, the fire is destructive and negative and bad, right? But just as well, the fire represents the hero's need to make a stand. And so his fire, his inner nature, is now enlivened with that fiery spirit to act and to make positive change. And so this is a really cool scene. To make a long story short. So here, Clark hides from the classroom in the womb of the janitor's closet from fear to anger, right? So he's first seeing all of this strange visuals because, of course, he's Superman and has these powers. He's scared, he's afraid, he's confused, he doesn't understand. He descends, he leaves and goes into a more confined state. So when we're presented with difficulties in the outer world, that makes sense, right? There's lots of chaos, lots of confusion, lots of, like, who knows what's going on these days, right? Right, we're just inundated with all of this like turmoil and whatnot. And so the natural thing to do for anybody, not just Clark, but anybody, is to shut oneself out from that. And so that's what he does here. And he shuts himself out and he goes through all these emotions. So notice he's going through these emotions. He's going from anger. Well, we've just went from confusion up here to anger down here, to sadness over here. Okay, so he's going through all these emotions, and all of that is what I'm saying corresponds to his descent into an Axis Mundi. And how you know it's a different expression of his mode of existence or mode of being is he's in the class and everyone can see him and everyone can watch him. Now he's in a janitor's closet and hidden from everyone. Okay, so when you're going from these different environmental states, you've gone to a different world or a different mode of being, and so you've transitioned from one place to another via an Axis Mundi, and this is here emphasized, of course, with the behavioral states. So the behavior and the psyche and his actions are the real. That's the real story, and everything else is there, kind of emphasizing how he interacts with his environment. And so his behavior has shifted in all of these ways. He's descended, therefore, but with the help of the mother, he, of course, comes into acceptance, right? So he's kind of gone through all these kind of typical psychological states: confusion, shock, fear, to anger, frustration, rage, sadness, right? So like crying, right? And then to finally acceptance and embrace, willingness for himself to step out back into the world. That's a beautiful moment. That's a really cool moment to see that kind of take place. But here I want to emphasize he's moving through different modes of being, and so moving along the Axis Mundi. Okay. So here we have Wallace Vernon Keefe, who starts out here in this scene isolated, confined, enclosed, in a very private kind of world, right? So he's kind of like in the womb, and he's brooding, he's working on stuff, he's got all these newspaper clippings, and he's just going through some serious psychological turmoil, and he actually pulls down the image of his family, him with his family, and naturally that's a very sad kind of thing to reminisce. So he goes from sadness to anger here, right? So he's like, you know what, I blame it all on Superman, and I don't like this statue. And to some extent he's right? They shouldn't be idolatrizing Superman in this way. So just because he's wrong to blame it all on Superman doesn't mean his actions may not have some merit to it, right? So it actually does. Like, Superman is a false god, based on how people treat him, rather than treating him just like, a guy who's trying to do the right thing. Like, that's cool, you can say that. But if you treat him as like this distant god, then you are idolatrizing him, right? And so his anger is sort of built from, all of these this emotional trauma that he's gone through with his family, with his legs and all of this. And so he's going through emotional states, but notice he's coming from a private situation to an exposed situation. Now he's visible. Now, like, all these eyes can see him, and he's doing something out in display. He's ascending the Axis Mundi to again send a message, right? So this is the message that gets sent at the peak of the Axis Mundi. It gets communicated to everyone in Metropolis, right? So he climbs this statue, and so we go from a state of privacy down here to a state of just like exposed. Now everyone can see what he's doing, and he's like very loud and boisterous, and they're locking him up, they're handcuffing him, put him in the police car, whatever. But the whole news is on top of it now. Now it's like this act has like dissipated outward. Okay, so this is an ascent of an Axis Mundi that transitions from a place of privacy to slowly moving to a place of exposure, right? So the outer world, okay? Just like, again, you can think of, if you want, a baby being born from a private location to a being exposed out in the world. We have another example of the Axis Mundi and a transition to behavioral state. So I like this one because it's like Lex being super friendly to the senator and like just trying to get on her good side. He eventually walks up close to the fireplace. So the fire is a sacred center. It's like this, almost like a shrine to his father, because he kept that whole place exactly as it was. And so like the fireplace is like that's the energetic center, you could say. And so he walks towards it. He walks up towards it, right? He actually goes on some steps. He gets elevated in some sense. And after she, kind of blocks him and is like, I'm not falling for your games, he turns around and kind of gets angry and changes his demeanor. So his behavior is a vast, stark contrast from when we entered to by the end of the scene, right? He's very much aggressive and in her face. You can even see in this image there's a more greater distance, but he gets really up in her face and is like really irritated with her. And so those stark differences tell you that you're talking about one mode of existence or state of being to another state of being. And so he's shed that outward persona, and so he's reborn as himself, like even like Clark on the oil rig, right? So you're shedding some outward persona of yourself, and you are exposing something true about yourself. And in that process, you have therefore ascended or descended an Axis Mundi in some sense. Okay, so he actually goes up, he turns around, and he comes back down. And by the time he comes back down, he's like a completely different person. All right. So man tries to build his own Axis Mundi, the rocket. Naturally, that's like an Axis Mundi trying to connect us to the heavens, the heavenly plane. Note the sort of tree-like, it almost looks like a tree, right? Looks like a tree. So that kind of connects to the motif of the Axis Mundi being like a world tree. And we see a pillar of fire. So there's a pillar of fire. And note as well, the rocket starts vertical and then goes horizontal. That's an important thing, because horizontal, what does that relate to? Among other things, it can relate to being dead or deceased, right? So you lay a person down in a casket, they're horizontal. If they're alive, well, they can stand. But so this rocket, if you treat it as like a living thing, is at first alive and is now dead, and he is lifting the dead. He is that bridge, right, that connects the dead to a higher realm. In Batman v Superman, Superman saving the girl from the burning tower. So the tower itself is like, that's certainly an Axis Mundi. He's descending, carrying her down from it, this sacred being. But he is the Axis, and in this case, the bridge between those two worlds. So he takes her from danger to safety, right? From the above to the below, right? And so here, we can see the sacred center character, of course, with all these hands kind of, pointing toward, the sacred being, right? The deity that they're kind of idolatrizing. And so he here is the sacred center amongst the, the outer dead souls that encircle him. Okay, that of course is similar to his descent here in the land of the dead. So if you actually look closely in BVS, he actually descends down and then he comes back up. So he's descended into the underworld and he starts his way on up. And here, he actually, in Man of Steel, he descends downward, right? But in the sea of dead skulls. So, again, the idea is that he is the hero itself is like a bridge between worlds, is like the Axis Mundi, and that's why they're kind of clinging towards him, is because they think he can bring them up to the sky, or bring them up into a better state of being, bring them up into an enlightened state of being, or a peaceful state of being, or whatever it is, right? So the sort of idolatry of putting all stake in this one thing or being, Mother Box, Superman, whatever it is, it's like that's the thing that will solve all of our problems, and then we'll be done, right? And I don't really have to do any work. We can just rely on this thing to do the work for us. That's the false thinking. You are going to have to do a lot of work, my friend.
We wanted you to learn what it meant to be human first, so that one day, when the time was right, you could be the bridge between two peoples.
But here we have a visual between him as bridge, as the hero as bridge between the divine and the earthly, right? So people talk a lot about these, Christ poses, and there gets a lot of criticism from that. But that's first of all a general thing for the human anatomy to do, and so it's first of all it's fair game. But two. The Christ on a cross is, if you analyze and interpret the symbolism of that, it's like, among other things, as I've talked about before, him embracing humanity, as well as being a bridge between two modes of being. So Christ is the bridge between, the earthly and the heavenly, right? And there's the Vitruvian Man that is the bridge through his navel between the earthly and the heavenly. And so, two, the hero, the individual spirit and soul, can stand as the bridge between two worlds. All right. So we see a lot of that occurring, but this is a very key theme in all of this. It's not so when you see the Christ pose, it's not a Christ pose. Christ is one expression of that. You should be thinking about what is being implied in the story. And so we have here, if you even look at the symbol, the poster, one of the posters, there is the world down here, right? So this is a world. This is the world of the below. This is the world of the above. We've talked a lot about these different worlds, but now we're bringing into the idea that it is an axis mundi, from one sacred center to another sacred center. He is the bridge, and so it's very much in the visual scheme of his very symbol, him being the bridge. And so the arms outstretched from earth to heaven is, again, an expression of that bridge. All right. So here I have just a reminder that these are, based on my own interpretation, but I 100% believe that these are the influences for this particular iteration of the Superman symbol. If you look at other Superman symbols, it doesn't quite look like this, but these are the water vessels for the puja ritual to carry holy water. And notice that in these water vessels, there is a center implied. You think I'm making this up? And yes, I am kind of making it up. But it's also like 100% true. So, it is what it is. So this has a sacred center. That's a key theme. This has a sacred center. That's a key theme. And this also, of course, alludes to the yin-yang symbol. These white and black dots represent sacred centers immersed in their respective worlds, right? So here's the world of the white. Here's the black immersed in the world of the white, and then the white immersed in the world of the black, okay? And there are transitions. So Superman is the bridge between those to unite those opposites and to not see them as wholly distinct entities, okay? These contrary, conflicting elements of reality, reconciling them, reconciling the necessity of good and evil, right? So good exists, evil exists, and we have to reconcile that as humans, don't we? And it's like, if good exists and evil exists, then really that means there's nothing we can do about that. Right? Everything exists with its opposite. And so the best we can do is to change our perspective on it, to reconcile those differences and to work them into our larger paradigm. And so to work those dualistic elements into a larger paradigm is to be the bridge, forming the bridge that connects the gap, the chasm between these opposite things. And so Superman is therefore transcendent of these dualistic energies as well, okay, or representative of the dualistic energies. So the only purpose to have Superman, and I talk about this in my thesis on Man of Steel, the only purpose to have Superman is if you actually have some evil threat to begin with. There'd be no point in Superman if there wasn't such vicious evil cruelty. So Superman is the polar complementary pair, or complementary to the evil in the world. And so you actually can't have Superman without some evil villain. You can't have the hero without the villain. If there's no villain, there's no such thing as a hero either, right? So the hero necessitates if we want there to be a hero, if you want to believe in heroes, and we like telling stories about heroes, that necessitates there be villains that are capable of cruelty. And so the more cruel your villain is, the greater your hero is. The greater he or she must redeem the fact that there is this great evil. right? So the hero is the redeemer of the world, to say that there's all this evil and chaos and tragedy and whatnot. It's the hero that redeems that. It's the hero that forms the complementary to that, to say, now I see why, we can't escape these polar opposites, and they must be simultaneously coexistent. We have another example. Aquaman, taking a guy from one state to another state. He carries him. He's lying down here. The hero is the bridge to those two worlds, so he carries that kind of dead and lethargic being, like not really doing anything, and he kind of plops him down on this table, right? So Aquaman is the bridge that this guy needed to come into the world of the, comforting, relatively speaking, comforting confines of this bar. Okay, so from being out in the chaos of the sea to being in this bar, that's one world to another world. Aquaman was that bridge. Aquaman was the guy who was like, all right, I'm taking you, right? So the hero is, by being the savior, that's the kind of savior that a lot of people want, and they idolatrize. Sometimes that type of saving is necessary, but we don't want to over-rely on us being, these dead, spiritually dead, passive, flaccid creatures that just rely on other people to stand for us. This is a really important idea as well. But here, I want to emphasize, Aquaman is the Axis Mundi right here. Here we have just an example of Batman moving from below, right? He actually comes from below, and then he goes into the above. So he has ascended an Axis Mundi, and we have surrounded by the multitude, a sacred center, right? The singular thing in the center. It's all there. Here we have Aquaman again as the Axis Mundi. We have his upward body, as well as his downward reflection is more shadowy and more kind of ethereal reflections in the water. But note, when he goes into the water, he leaves these circular emanations. Okay, so this time he goes from above back into below. But the idea is that he was the sacred center, and he's effectively going back into the water, and we've talked about what does that mean. If you're going into the water, that can be like a death, right? Being dead in the water. So he's going back into the hidden state, into the hidden realm, and not taking a stand, right? This is Batman's trying to say, stand for something, let's work together, let's do something, let's change the world for the better. And Aquaman's like, nah, I'm good. And so he's like, okay, I'm going back into the land of the unseen, the hidden, the enclosed, the separated, So that's the idea. It's like, that is a kind of tragic death. That is like, okay, you have the ability to do something, you're not doing that thing. Right? And so you're not taking the hero, you're not answering the call, the hero's call, right? The call to adventure is what Bruce brings to Aquaman. And he denies that call. So this is the refusal of the call, if you want. Here we have the Axis Mundi. We emphasize the rotational elements. So actually, during this scene, we have Superman is like the Axis Mundi, the sacred thing that they're all kind of alluding to. But the scene kind of rotates around this central figure, right? So there's a rotational element of the Axis Mundi. All right, so it's an axis, it's a sacred hub. When we talk about the chakras mean wheel. And so the worlds rotate around the central axis, the Axis Mundi, the central hub. Okay, so whenever you see a rotation around that, well, you're seeing that element of the world navel, the world tree, the Axis Mundi, whatever you want to call it, the sacred center. Here we speak again about the rotational element, but in terms of the spiral staircase, right? So the spiral staircase is the way in which one ascends here the Axis Mundi to reach the mother box in the Atlantean sacred temple. Here again we have the Axis Mundi. They ascend, they kind of go along this spiral staircase pattern. In this case it's more of a square, but we see like there's like these layers of the spiral staircase that go all the way kind of down. We see the concentric circles on the way up. Okay, so this is like reflective of like the above from the below, but there's again this idea that there is a central axis, and you can convey it in a lot of ways with concentric circles, concentric rotations, spiral staircase, all of these things. So they're actually on their way to ascent here. They're ascending, they're taking a stand, right? They're doing something. They're not being confined, they're taking a stand. Here there's the rotation when Martian Manhunter leaves. He ascends upward, but he does so by rotating. So he actually rotates around that axis. So let me get it better. So he rotates as he does so, right? So that's, again, there's this motif of rotating as we transition. So there's a change in perspective, there's a change in our orientation, kind of spiraling around. And another reason why the spiraling might be a useful notion is that it does indicate an orientation and a direction, right? So here he's spiraling and he's moving upward. And there's a sense of like stability. Like when you throw a football, you put a spin on it, it's rotating, it stays in that, or it's more likely to stay in that orientation. It's more stable. The rotational element is here as Wonder Woman descends and kind of goes down, rotates around to get information and find that hidden knowledge that's been buried, to understand what's going on. So she actually has to descend the Axis Mundi, and she rotates this way to do so. In Man of Steel, there's the Council. So here's the Council, the pillar in the center. But all of these vehicles are orbiting or rotating around the sacred center, the sacred council. So that, again, the circles, the orbiting, the rotation, the circumambulation, the axial rotation, spiral staircase, all of these things relate to ways to convey some sort of central axis that is sacred because it allows one to ascend and communicate. And here, Jor-El is communicating with the council. All right, so here we have the Axis Mundi taking Lois Lane from the world above into the alien ship in outer space down to the world below, right? So this sort of crater is the circle that designates their landing spot and the sacred center of that. As this comes down, it's actually like spiraling on downward. And so this is another example of the spiraling nature as one traverses the Axis Mundi from one state here above into from the world of this sort of cosmic plane to the land of man, or Earth, right? Another example, of course, is the tornado, right? The tornado actually kills the father and therefore passes him on into a spiritual realm, right? Into the heavenly realm. The tornado, you can also think in terms of, if you want another example, the Wizard of Oz, right? The tornado, it's a twister. That twisting axial rotation takes Dorothy from her mundane reality to a divine reality. That is an Axis Mundi, and there is a rotational element, okay? So it really is like an axis, a place where things rotate around, and, but the idea is it is a connecting bridge between the above and the below realm, and thus, as well, we see the rotational motif. Here we have Superman kind of passive looking this way. He actually rotates on up into the mode of being ready to fight, right? So here he's more passive. He rotates and ascends a bit of Axis Mundi to then fight, Okay, he's ready to fight Zod. He's like, you're a monster, Zod, and I'm going to stop you. Right? There's a change from one state to now being like super assertive about what he's going to do. The drone at the end of Man of Steel rotates as it comes down, and it starts from the world of the above, and it crashes to the world of the below. So again, axis mundi, axial rotation, one world above, two world below. Here we have what I've talked about before, but which also is forms a kind of axis mundi. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, the team shot at the end is like a bundle of sticks. So these bundle of heroes, if you want, are bound, right? They're all unified, but they're unified in a good way. They're unified like because they all chose to be unified, right? That's kind of a good kind of thing, but it does represent a kind of fasces, where it's the Roman symbol of strict justice. So just very briefly, the rods were bound together with a single-headed axe, so like here, and a slightly longer central staff, right? So the sacred center concept is also in this fasces symbol, where there's the longer thing in the center, and it's bound, surrounded by these other rods. So the axe was not only ceremonial, but was used in the early republic to execute those sentenced to death. Okay, so we see here the fasces symbol in the Capitol Hill. So fasces were typically carried over the left shoulder of magisterial attendants known as lictors, as symbols of a judicial authority. Here, I definitely want to say is this representation of justice. This is the Justice League after all. The fasces is a symbol, a Roman symbol of justice. That is, things are bound together. These constituent elements or rods are bound together, unified in some sense. So the Justice League is like the unifying aspect. So a league of people coming together for justice. That's what these rods represent. That's strength in numbers. Okay, there's strength in people coming together. And anyway, so remember, it's a symbol of justice, and it was used to execute for those sentenced to death. So Steppenwolf here is sentenced to death. And the Justice League comes together to implement that execution, right, by decapitation, which is exactly like the axe. So the axe is a very important symbol here. We'll look next with some other examples, but here we see the Justice League implementing a kind of bridge to another world, to justice to death, right? So again, after they do this, or when Aquaman stabs Steppenwolf, these kind of rods go through him, right, of the trident, whatever you want to call it. Superman punches him to another location where Wonder Woman slices down on him, decapitates him with the sword, so the sharp end. So that's like exactly what this rod, this fasces is doing, if we look at the picture at the top here. So there's the bundle, and then there's a change in direction, and then there's the slashing element. So here's like the sharp edge of that fasces axe. Superman is the bridge between those two worlds, right? Aquaman, that's Atlanteans coming from below.
You could be the bridge between two peoples.
Superman, the bridge connecting to Themyscirans from the land above, and so she comes down from above. It's all there, my friends. One need only look. And in that process, Steppenwolf has ascended, or descended if you want, an Axis Mundi, because his head goes through the portal. Remember, the Axis Mundi is also a portal to another world. His head actually falls through there. Okay, so he's being transitioned from a state of life to a state of death. And for Steppenwolf, that is mercy. Okay, because frankly, Darkseid doesn't care one iota about him, and yet he is too bound to trying to appease this idolatrous image of Darkseid. But the interesting thing here, again, is the fasces, the axe, as a symbol of justice, but also an axis mundi, right? So these bound elements together, I'm saying, is a Justice League itself. So these rods are like the Justice League. And then we see here, down here, an actual implementation of this kind of rods going through them from below. That's like this part. Superman, the bridge between two peoples. And Wonder Woman, the axe head itself. So the axe head itself up here, coming down from above. Okay? So the axe is a very important thing, and I just want to emphasize, remember, so this is also kind of, the fasces is like a bundle of sticks with an axe head. Here we just see kind of an axe head with kind of one rod, but this emphasizes the axe itself as part of being an indicator of the axis mundi. And how do we know that? Well, both Steppenwolf and Darkseid slam their axe into the ground, of course, as an overexpressed, unrestrained, phallic gesture to with such disdain and disrespect toward the earth, designates a center. There is a sacred center. There is a sacred center, right? So they are like, if you know a little bit about, just a very little bit about, like me, I only know a very little bit about mythology. If you know even just a little bit, you know a major story is the Labyrinth and the Minotaur, the myth of the Minotaur at the center of the Labyrinth. So this is like a labyrinth. And the bull man, the half man, half bull, is at the center of the labyrinth. And in both cases, when they slam their axe down, they're slamming an expression of their phallus. They're slamming as well an expression of the axis mundi. How do we know? Again, they are in a sacred center. They are the center. They are the bull at the center of this labyrinth here. Okay? So we're back into the sacred centers, right? So when you follow the path within, you go to the center. And the center is the center of a labyrinth here. Okay? So they are the half man, half bull abomination. That means they have not actually reconciled their opposite modes of being. You know, the good and true person reconciles their opposite modes and integrates them into a harmonious whole. The half man, half bull is an expression of kind of a disharmonious unification of these opposite things. Right? So there's a disharmonious unification, which actually is represented by the fact that the parademons are kind of forced to do their bidding. And then there's a harmonious unification of one based on free will and choice. And like, you know what? Let's come together and do this. You're not forced to, but if you would like to, we could use your help and we got your back. Right? So that's a unification. That's Justice League based on free will coming together to do what is right. That is the hopeful and end goal of the whole thing. Trying to force things to make sense, just like Batman and BVS. Trying to use the intellect and force and aggression and all this stuff to force people into a unified whole. That is an abomination. Okay, so just an aside, but here again, it's the axis mundi. It's the sacred center. Here we look at Steppenwolf's Stronghold and compare it to Yggdrasil, which is an image of the Norse world tree. So that's here, right, the image of the Norse world tree. We see on the right a kind of similar visual. There's the dome around the central pillar. Remember, there's a pillar in the center. So this is like the top-down view. So there's the top-down view of the dome. And there's the side view, which kind of has this bubble, this exterior bubble around it, just like this Norse image of the world tree or the axis mundi. And So it has a central axis connecting the above and the below worlds. And so this is like this central axis here. I also want to point out that we see here the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail here, just kind of going in loops, mindless, thoughtless loops, right? Here is Barry, if you can see very closely, which we've talked about. Barry making loops around that little blue streak there is supposed to be Barry making loops around this world image. Okay, so here we see the dome, kind of like a womb of creation. We have the tree. This kind of looks like a tree. Kind of looks like a palm tree, frankly, but it's like a tree motif, definitely as well. So we also have the world engine itself and Yggdrasil. They both also look very similar. They are expressions of the axis mundi, the world navel, the world center. It's called world engine after all, right? That's the engine is related to the fact that there's lots of energy in the center. That's what we've talked about. There's this energetic center. There's world creation happening with the world axis motif. So the center here is the pillar of light emanating here, this pillar of light, all the way through the earth. So all through the world. It forms its own axis. Like I said, of course, it's called the world engine as it generates the world by passing material along its axis or navel, because remember, the center is the inexhaustible well that supports the very structure of the world. We see the concentric ring motif. So if you look here, there's concentric rings, just like these concentric rings, right? These concentric, this sort of circle defining the world, concentric rings, okay? So we see the water ring above here, and we see the ocean ring, also water, but we also see a rainbow ring. And so those, we'll talk about those as well. That is important in the next slide. But note that the fact that the creation of one world means the destruction of another owing to ambivalence of the world axis. So too, when people ascend this axis mundi, it's actually like a bad thing, right? So just because you ascend something doesn't mean it's a good thing. They actually rise up into the air and they get slammed back down, right? So that's a very aggressive, kind of tragic expression. But the axis mundi is the generator of all things, good and evil, right? So it'll have both of those. It has that ambivalence. So the circular emanations of destruction act to clear away an older paradigm. So as these world engine emanations occur, it actually pushes things back further out, clearing the way. So on the highest point of view, the story is about the establishment of Superman, and so the desecrated area is so too the consecration of the sacred space, allowing for the birth of Superman. The undulatory waves of contractions in preparation as a mother gives birth to dilate or expand the cervix is so too a destruction to consecrate, i.e. clear away and open the space for the baby to pass through the axis mundi of the birth canal, the bridge from the hidden and inner womb to the exposed outer womb or world for the rebirth of the hero, Superman in this case. So note the world engine in the Indian Ocean is shown with 3 rings. So let me get rid of this first. And we see 3 rings, like we said before. So there's the ring above. There's the rainbow ring. It's kind of larger out here. And then there's the ring at the bottom, at the base, at the surface of the earth, or the ocean, I should say. So note the world engine in the Indian Ocean is shown with 3 rings, which mirror the 3 planes of the birth canal. So the birth canal itself has 3 planes that are described in the process of birth, with there being an inlet, so that's the top. There's the mid-plane, and then there's the outlet. So there's in, mid-plane, outlet, in the birth canal. Okay? And it should be noted Remember, we talked a lot about axial rotation as one transitions and passes through the axis mundi. So it should be noted that these three planes are not perfectly circular, and as such require the baby to rotate as it passes through the birth canal. So in fact, they're more like elongated in such a way that as the baby comes in, it has to rotate to get out safely. So it has to rotate one way, and then it rotates back to pass through properly those openings, because the head is longer one way and then the shoulders are longer a different way. So the head axis, the longer part of the head axis versus the longer part of the shoulder axis of the baby, that axis along the human body requires this kind of rotation as it comes out. So that's really interesting. So the birth canal is a bona fide axis mundi. So we can think of passage into a different plane of existence or mode of being as corresponding to a simultaneous death from one world and rebirth into a new world. In this world image, death to leave one world is simply to enter into another world, but in a new form with a changed, rotated, permutated perspective relative to the old world. So again, I want to emphasize that here, the world engine, this is supposed to be the birth canal. This beam here represents the path of the birth canal, or the axis mundi, and these three rings represent the opening of the birth canal, the different radii of the birth canal, the circular planes. So just like we've talked about the planes of reality in the axis mundi in the world tree myth, we see it has deep connections to the womb of creation itself, the womb of creation, and the birth canal. So from womb to outer womb, right, of the world, okay? But it has to pass these three planes of reality to get to that other outer world. So this is, when Superman actually ascends this, he's ascending a birth canal, just like we talked about before, but now we see a little bit more clear and more precise the structure of what is already in my thesis on Man of Steel, which is really cool. I definitely did not know this when I first looked into it. So that's awesome. All of this, will come together. Lastly, we look at the world engine again. World engine, world axis, world navel. That's Yggdrasil, the axis mundi. That's what the world engine is supposed to be. It's the world navel, where energy is actually communicated between these different states. So actually, the energy we can see is actually pulsated throughout the planet. It's going one way, and then it's going back, and it's going one way, it's going back. And so that represents that can also be the omphalos, or the world navel is what it's called, right? So the world engine is also the world navel, where nutrients or energy or materials are communicated from one mode of being to another. So the mother takes in material, passes it on to the baby through the navel. Here we look at it as a tree of life, though. So remember, the tree of life has this sort of spiritual element above, this spiritual realm, and then there's a physical realm down below. And that's what I want to relate to. This up here, this is where Superman actually goes, right in the center of the world engine. And but this here is what I'm saying is actually the crown Keter, the crown, okay? Because here is the divine emanations, just pure potential and energy, just like anything, God, just God himself, just like divine emanations. That's the plane of the spirit. So we're in the spiritual realm here. And down here, we're in the realm of Malkuth. That means we're in the physical plane. That means we're in the plane of reality, or like what our mundane reality is. So we see it's like there is no superpowered being there. It's like they're trying to push it up. They're weak, right? Human beings don't have superhuman strength, obviously, right? And so this down here represents Malkuth, the physical plane. And Superman is on the other side of the world tree, or the world engine, or the world navel. Here, I'm connecting it to the tree of life. He's on the other side of that. And he makes contact with the crown itself. So the crown is what he is ascending to, the very top of that, the sort of divine emanations that here he wants to prevent all of that through will. So the idea is that the crown Sephiroth, the Keter, is the funnel to filter the higher Ein Sof. So Ein Sof is actually where it's like just pure radiance, and there's no, it's just true, like limitless potential and power is here at the peak. It's Keter which represents the divine will to filter those divine emanations so that reality can actually take place, in the various colors and physical manifestations of reality can take place. Because when you're at the very limit of existence, then it's like anything, power. But it's the crown Keter, that initial spark of divine will. So Superman, I'm saying, represents that divine will that filters out this, well, I called it Keter before, but it's actually Ein Sof, the divine, it's like limitless emanations. And by filtering that out, by kind of denying some of that through his divine will of ascent, he is able to, therefore, be the life-giving source to Keter in the physical plane. Notice, I want to emphasize as well, the Hermetic Maxim here is right. There's this idea that if you look closely in this scene, in this part, this shot, and this shot actually, so Superman is struggling in these shots. He's struggling to use force. And, well, what do you know? So are they, right? So they are as well struggling. It's like, you push, I'll pull, right? And it's only when they give up. It's only when they give up trying to use force to rectify their situation, they accept their situation and act on faith, and he stays with her. So Perry White stays with Jenny. It's only when that occurs can Superman have the strength to actually act out. And this is kind of a subtle idea, but here it goes. The idea is both the spiritual plane where Superman is and the physical plane where they are reflections of each other. And this is where we're talking about the Hermetic Maxim, as above, so below. They're reflections, but they're also permutations of each other, right? So they're both struggling, but they're also very much connected. And so when they stop struggling down here, the energy is what I'm saying. The energy, since these places are connected, that energy is allowed to be passed through to Superman, right? So in Perry White's divine act of letting go and staying with Jenny, that's a superheroic act spiritually. That's a superheroic spiritual act of transcendence, to deny his own need for self-preservation amidst buildings crumbling around him for another human being, and therefore to act upon faith in that. That's the most compassionate thing to do. That's actually, in the realm of Malkuth, in the realm of the physical plane, that is superheroic. That is Superman. Okay? In the realm of the spiritual, Superman is like the divine being. So in the divine being, his thing that he needs to do is act out physically. So there's a place to act out physically. There's a place to act out spiritually and let go, and to not act out physically, right? And so in the physical plane, required spiritual transcendence. In the spiritual divine plane, required physical transcendence. So he used the will to act out physically. He actually had to fly and punch this thing into desecration, right? Superman needs to act out physically in the divine spiritual realm. Perry White and Lombard have to act out spiritually. They have to let go of the physical need for self-preservation and act out a spiritual transcendence. So a transcendence that isn't manifested outward in a physical, tangible form. And so this is as above, so below, but notice they're inverted. But it's the same story. It's the same thing. It's just they're inverted. Okay, so in the physical plane required a spiritual transcendence of going in all the way, right? So he goes in all the way into the earth. These, by the way, represent roots of the earth. So Perry White has to go into the earth. So as Perry White goes into the earth, Superman ascends to the sky. So this is the as above, so below. And if you're not understanding that they're being inverted, they're mirror images of each other, you won't see how it's as above, so below. It's like one thing implies another thing. Like they're deeply, deeply connected. And that deep connection is also emphasized by the fact, again, Superman was struggling at first. When they're struggling, when they let go, that energy, that cosmic energy is allowed to pass through Superman fully. That cosmic energy of that being willing to sacrifice oneself as an act of faith to stay with Jenny and to not be guided by selfish needs of preservation, but to simply be there with her. That's a Superman transcendent thing, but that's a spiritual thing. That's a mental thing. And so that reflects or mirrors Superman's divine kind of like physical transcendence over the world engine. So that concludes chapter 1 of Seeking the Sacred. Thank you all for watching. We will be moving into vastly wild territory very soon. And the reason why I want to do it in this way, I could have talked about this other stuff first, but for me, it's important to set the stage for what is true and what should be the true nature, which is to understand. To understand and take time, take things one step at a time, and to always seek understanding, to never be complacent with some idolatrous thing, some gimmick. Because we're about to get into completely new territory. And I will share with you, finally, if you've noticed, I haven't shared a thesis statement yet. This is still a thesis, and so still needs a thesis statement. I haven't said any thesis statement yet. So after chapter 1, we will get into the thesis statement and what is actually happening. What is actually happening. So buckle your seatbelts, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.